Last week, we told you about the Personal Performance Summit, which was sponsored by TD Wealth, and we spoke to a large number of very interesting people, and one of them was Michelle Guillen, and she was a journalist at CBS News reporting on the worst natural disasters, war, and all sorts of crime. But after years of doing that, it got to her, and she dedicated her life to positivity and wrote a best-selling book, Broadcasting Happiness. I asked her about a profound experience she had regarding a young girl who was killed and how it changed her life.
What happened to her was she was shot at her own birthday party by a bullet from stray gang gunfire. But for me, the experience, the reason it changed the trajectory of my life was that when I was at this funeral, I saw this beautiful, loving community supporting the mother who had just lost her daughter. And physically what I saw was these women, presumably the other mothers from the neighborhood, and they were surrounding this mother, and all of them were swaying together to songs of prayer. It was so beautiful, and what it made me realize in that moment was that while we were broadcasting the story of what happened, we were missing so many other parts. And what I'm now realizing is that the way that we talk about challenges in our life, whether it's a very serious challenge like this one that the mother was experiencing, or more kind of everyday stresses, changes the way that our brain responds, and it changes the way that people around us respond to these challenges as well, and then therefore our actions moving forward.
Your thesis, if I can, and correct me if I'm wrong, is essentially that we being positive and happy is something that we generate ourselves, but more importantly, we influence others in how we do things. So tell me just a bit about that and how you came to that beyond what you just said.
Yeah, so I started to investigate the science of positive psychology, the science of happiness, which looks at human potential and how when our mindset is in its peak performance zone, we're more resilient, empowered, positive, optimistic. It actually transforms every single business and educational outcome that we know how to track, from our levels of productive energy to at work, our sales. Everything skyrockets when our brain is in that more positive state. So as I started to see the value of it, what I started to look at in terms of the news was, if we're telling negative stories, how are we helping people? And then in our businesses, as leaders and as colleagues, if we start to get stuck in all of those challenges and the gossip and the negativity and the uncertainty, we're actually not leaving our brain the resources it needs to be at its best performance.
I think what's interesting, with these conversations, it's not just a Pollyanna perspective. I mean, you actually have the metrics to back this up and say, no, actually, when you do this, to your point, you have better outcomes. Why don't you think more people are doing it then?
Well, I think that there's a slight misunderstanding about the definition of positivity or happiness in these terms. We really look at it from a scientific standpoint of optimism. Optimism is the expectation of good things to happen and the belief that your behavior matters, especially in the face of a challenge. We can very quickly see the people who are more optimistic versus pessimistic. If you lose your job, the optimist will very quickly jump on LinkedIn, network with old friends, update their resume. The pessimists get around to those activities out of necessity, but it just takes a lot longer because they don't necessarily believe that good things will happen, like they'll find a job, right? When we study it from that perspective, what we see in businesses, for instance, is that if you're more optimistic as a sales professional, as I mentioned, you outsell your pessimistic counterparts by 37%. That was a study done by the University of Pennsylvania at MetLife with insurance sales professionals, and in their follow-up study, they found it was 56%. I would hire optimistic sales people, right? And so I think the reason that more companies aren't investing in these kind of well-being programs and these simple changes to their workforce is just because of lack of knowledge. But we're seeing actually more and more companies are. They're turning the tide. We, through my company, Good Think, we've worked with a third of the Fortune 100 companies. We're now bringing this research to schools. We had a fantastic experience with a school in Iowa, a very poor school. The school district was suffering grades and graduation scores, et cetera. They decided to transform it to make it more of a positive education. They got the bus drivers sending notes to the kids saying, it's not just wonderful to have you on your bus, but here's why. Those notes were going home to the parents.
Wow.
And that, along with a handful of other things that they did, ended up raising the average ACT score from 17 to 23. They got a grant for $5.3 million. And people who live in the rich districts next door they were busing their kids in to this poor district to have a positive education.
Wow.
There is so much potential in this research. It's just about putting it into practice.
Okay, so someone, let's say, is watching us have this conversation right now. Okay, I want to do something here.
Yes.
What do I do? And you have something in here you talk about called a power lead.
Yes.
Tell me what a power lead is. How can someone actually take some of this and put it in practice?
So all the strategies that I talk about in my book, Broadcasting Happiness, wrap around this idea of positive communication. You know, I took the media and I take the positive psychology and I merge it. The power lead is my #1 favorite strategy because it's so simple. A power lead is starting off conversations and any other interaction you have with other people by saying something positive and meaningful. How many times do we start off conversations? I've done it. We've all gotten caught. How are you? Oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I'm so stressed, right? Where does the conversation go?
And then the person wants to match you.
Yeah, they want to match. They play misery poker. Oh, you think you're stressed? Let me tell you about my commute, right? Meanwhile, if we start off by sharing something positive and meaningful, that's authentic, right?
That's the key, though, I think.
That's the key.
Because I was going to say, I know I think a lot of people would feel even more stressed if they feel they have to share something happy when they're not. It's finding something that you're happy about, right?
Yes, and it's beneficial on 2 levels. First, it trains your brain to scan your day for something positive to share, right? So it's like kind of like a gratitude practice as you're looking for those things. And then you're saying it to somebody else. Most likely, they're matching in kind. The reason I call it a power lead is you're taking the lead on the conversation. And that's really the inflection point where we see powerful people be able to influence the trajectory of conversations.
A positive note to lead things on. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.